All right. Well, I wish I could see you all in person. I wish you all could get down there. That was when I originally heard about this. I thought that's what we were going to do. So I was really looking forward to that. Um, but I'm glad I'm being able to see you all here. And I know you're all over the place. You're down in Arizona still, right, Adam? And Eugene, you're in Chicago, and Kevin, you're up there. And Sarah, are you in St. Louis area still?
Yep, I'm still in St. Louis.
Cool, cool. So let's go ahead and start it by introducing each of you and give the name of your book, and what you're, perhaps all of you were Daily Eastern News folks and Eastern grads. So if you tell us just real briefly, maybe the 60-second quick one of your name, the name of the book, and we'll start asking questions from there.
Sure, I'll go. So Kevin Kenealy came over in 2006 to EIU. I wrote the thriller Neighborhood Watch, graduated EIU in 2008.
Adam?
I am Adam Testa. My book is To Live and Die at Shadow Ridge. 2007 EIU grad with degrees in journalism and marketing.
Good. Eugenia?
My name is Eugenia Jefferson, and I wrote Confessions of a Frustrated Millennial. I graduated from Eastern in 2008. And yeah.
Great.
And then I'm Sarah, writing as Sarah Henry, S.E. Henry. You guys all probably know me as Sarah Whitney. And I wrote a first in 3 fantasy trilogy and graduated from Eastern in 2007 as well.
Excellent. So I guess one question when people are talking about books, I mean, everybody writes different types. Looks like we have all 4 of these are fiction, correct? So when you're working on fiction, what drove you for this topic? You know, what is it? Because writing is hard, as you all know, especially with journalism. And then I can tell you just from writing nonfiction books, I know how hard that is. And I myself am in the midst of working on a fiction book, and it's hard as hell. You know, I mean, it's a big difference between journalism and even nonfiction to do that. So what if you could share, maybe to start out, why you chose the topic you did, and how you were able to stick with it. So maybe Eugenia, go ahead and start with that.
Well, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to see you again, Joe and Kevin and Adam and Sarah. I know we've worked many times at the Den. We called it the Daily Eastern News. For me, it was more a little bit autobiographical, but not really, with hints of fiction. So I wrote Confessions of a Frustrated Millennial when I was in my mid-20s, I would say that. At that time, I was kind of working in a job I wasn't really passionate about. I just got my graduate degree, which I got from Roosevelt in marketing. And I just was in a place, probably a quarter life crisis, you call it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is not what I expected. And so I started originally with the first character. So I have 3 characters in my book, Natasha, Danielle, and Jayla. The first character, Natasha, was probably a little bit closer to what I was experiencing. And I kind of decided to branch off to 3 different characters, different stories. They don't intersect, just to kind of show that, you know, it's more than just universal to have this type of frustration at this life, at this time of your life. And so I wrote Danielle's story and Jayla's story separately later on, and kind of just continued to write it. I was like freelancing at the time. And so I just continued to just write, and it kind of developed into a book. And I'm like, why not just, you know, see where this goes? Maybe I'm not feeling the same way and other people can relate to it. And luckily that's been the case.
Excellent. So Kevin, just because you're next on the screen for me, tell us a little bit about the book there, and is Did any autobiographical situation come into play for any of your characters?
Yeah, and so first off, I just want to give kudos to Adam and Sarah and Eugenia. I mean, you're all fabulous writers. I've read all your stuff. I don't mean to be a creeper. Sarah, I'm actually finishing up No Time to Cry right now. But I'm getting ideas from each of you from different things that you did, and it's interesting to hear you, Eugenia, say that about how you went back and wrote these characters later, because even though they were all different, I saw that they were all trying to make it in their own various way, and I thought that was brilliantly done. From being on the Den, I saw that tell the truth and don't be afraid, right? And so truth is stranger than fiction. And one of the things as a good reporter, you're always asking what if, 5 W's in the H kind of thing. And so living in Orland Park, it's a fairly safe area. So I'm out shoveling snow one day, dead of winter, and one of my neighbors comes up, introduces herself. She knows everybody's name in the neighborhood. She knows what their occupation is, where they live, all this stuff. Nice lady. But it kind of gave me these creeper vibes, and I was like, well, what if she isn't a nice lady underneath? Probably not. And so then a few weeks later, I find out we have a town email, it's called the Neighborhood Watch email, where we all look out for each other and everything's great. And I was like, well, what if everything isn't great? And that's the journalist in me just coming out and just asking those questions. And so I wrote the first 10 pages rather quickly in a summer, because as a teacher, I have that time, about what the history of that town is like and how it got to a point where things aren't so good, but on the outside they are. All these rules and regulations, so people have freedoms. So it's kind of an ironic twist. And these characters are very manipulative and all this stuff. So it started in truth and just expanded to this fictional mess, where people can relate to a character like that, people that they've seen, but are totally not real, right? But it's real within that world. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Adam, how about you?
So since I was probably 15 years old, I've had a story idea in my head that was a young adult fiction novel in the vein of like what would become Harry Potter and that trend. Started writing it 10 times through the years and maybe got 20,000 words into it before giving up. And always knew that I wanted to write a book, publish it. It was a dream, just never had the chance to really sit down and do it. And then in February of 2020, the world shut down and we were all sent to work from home, didn't have to commute to the office every day, weren't running all over on the weekends. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm going to try to do this. And if there's ever been a time that I'm going to write a book, this is going to be it. And I had a subscription to Masterclass through my job. And so the benefit of that was I could use it for personal stuff as well. And so I watched Dan Brown's mystery writing masterclass. And one of the things he talked about is, if you've ever read a Dan Brown book, it's not a surprise that he takes two unrelated concepts and smashes them together in a way that creates a situation you don't expect. And so took that concept, and at the time I was working in the homeowners association management business, which, as you can imagine, is one of the most dry fields you can probably work in. But kind of in the vein of what Kevin was saying, it's what if there's more beneath the surface there than what you think? And so it became this combination of an HOA master planned community and then serial killer conspiracy theory on the other side. And again, like Dan Brown said, just slamming those together and seeing what came out of it. And so over the 7 months from April to November of 2020, I wrote the 3 drafts of the book and went through editing and proofing and beta reading and all of that, and finally was able to cross that off the bucket list and say, I wrote a book.
So combining two things together that shouldn't be together, like like honesty in politics.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Government intelligence.
yeah, that's exactly oxymorons, right? Right, exactly. Well, cool. Hey, Sarah, what's any bio? Oh, Siri just thought I was talking to her on my phone. So any biographical in yours at all, or what drove you to to write these fantasy? I knew that you used to talk about that when you were a student, about wanting to do things in fantasy writing. What drove you to write this trilogy?
Yeah, so the trilogy is about two twins who are 15, 16 at the time that this novel starts, and they find out that the night terrors one of the boy twin is having is real, and that the whole idea kind of actually came from a dream that I had. One of the scenes about a girl who had powers and ripped a hole in reality, and it was just like this very vivid, just probably came because I watched The Hobbit, or whatever it was that was popular back in 2011. So that's when I first started writing it. And to your point, Joe, yes, I've always known I was going to be a fantasy writer. When I was there at the Den, I was, if I wasn't at the newspaper, I was actually over in the English department, hanging out with the creative writing teachers. Dr. Fern Corey actually was one of my main mentors. I loved her. And she's the one who got me onto fantasy. She told me one time, she was like, wow, your writing is a mix of Philip Pullman and Terry Pratchett. And so I had never really considered myself a fantasy writer or YA. And so from there, I get up every morning and write, whether it's basically an hour before I have to start my morning routine. That's what I've done. And I've done that honestly since probably my days at Eastern. And so just little by little, I've kind of chipped away. But like I said, the book came from a dream, but then it kind of morphed into, at the time when I was at Eastern, my younger brother was going through some really difficult, he was a teenager and going through a lot of difficult challenges. And so I took my anxiety and worry for him as his big older sister and kind of channeled that into the story and the dynamic between the two siblings. And it really is not so much a book about this. I mean, it's fantasy, right? So you've got really cool creatures and imaginative elements and fantastical beings, but really at the end of the day, it's about the two siblings that are growing apart, basically. So it's your coming of age YA, and how they both grapple with that.
Sarah, you mentioned something about your work habits, and that was one of the things I wanted to dive into, because everybody who hasn't written a book is always wondering, how the heck do you get to it, much less start it? So you were talking about your work schedule was every morning getting up there for at least 1 hour and just to write. And then the next day, do you just pick up on from where you were? Do you go back that next day and say, hey, what did I write, and look at that first? Or some people I know, will go in the afternoon and look at it. Can you expand a little bit on your work habits there, your writing?
Yeah, so I mean, what I found actually really helpful is I found a critique group. I went to the Missouri Writers Guild. I kind of joined up a chapter of that and found some other writers who were in this, similar genres, stories, and we would actually, even before Zoom was a thing in 2020, we would get on a WebEx call at 6 in the morning. And it was 5:15 in the morning, chit chat for a few minutes, have coffee, and then for 45 minutes, set a timer, and then it's called sprinting. And so we would write whatever it was. And then we had our own little Facebook group, private group. And so at the end of it, we'd post, your word count. And it was just kind of like a friendly competition or update on what you were doing. So, the first book, it actually turned into a over 100,000 word monster, which was not something that agents want to publish, or publishers straight out of the box. And so I actually split it into two and slowly wrote it over the, like I said, the last, I guess, 10 years now, the first one.
Oh, interesting. Eugenia, what was your work habits? What was did you get up in the morning, late at night?
Well, I know for me, when I wrote the book, I was like in between jobs. I know like a good portion of the book I would write, I would say like on weekends. Weekends were my sweet spot, and it still is. So like I would treat my Saturdays like a full-time job, like 8 hours, take a break when I can, but like just straight writing. Sometimes I'll go to different, like if I don't write in my home, I'll write, I go to the library, or Starbucks is my favorite place. To kind of just get a newer environment. But yeah, that was like kind of like what I did when I was in between jobs. I was just writing in between that time. So if I had a freelance job that was 3 months, most of the time I will be too exhausted to write. But you know, when that job is gone, you know, I could write in between that time, and I had all day to write. So yeah, I'm still finding that balance now for the second book, and Saturdays are still my go-to, and Sundays. But yeah, it's a bit difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I know and plus, as you're talking about different habits, sometimes when you're younger, it could be later at night that you can do the writing. I can tell you for me, I'm more likely to write at 5 a.m. Than at 10 at night. So did you also find this? Sometimes I know when I'm writing, I will just zone out and it feels like, 4 hours was 15 minutes. Is that because the reason I asked that is you sometimes said you did 6-8 hours or something in a day. So how did that time go?
Yes, it did feel like sometimes 15 minutes, an hour will be 15 minutes in my book, because you get like sucked into the story. You get sucked into what the character is doing, what the storyline, how it's going. And also, like for me, I tend to plan it out as kind of like an outline first. So at least I can have the outline as a blueprint. And sometimes I veer off from that, but I try to keep it to the blueprint because I want to make sure everything is being like cohesive. I'm not like saying something different in chapter 5 than I am in chapter 15. So my blueprint is like, that's the outline and that I go by, but I can freely, maybe add new dialogue if it makes sense, and fits into the blueprint.
Cool. So Kevin, you talked about writing in the summers because that's when you have the time off, and during the school year, obviously teaching high school, especially something like English is grinding. So what was your writing routine? Did you find yourself having to go on the weekends? Did you have to go early in the morning? What worked for you?
I mean, I have 2 little kids, 3 and 5. So that's a fun age, trying to make sure that the 3-year-old doesn't kill the 5-month-old.
Right.
I'm going through grad school for English Lit actually now too. So that, going back to Sarah's point, and that's interesting with that writers group. Every class I'm taking serves as a writers group. Right now I'm taking a course in editing, so that's interesting. But yeah, I'm a morning person. I actually get up between 4 and 4:30 because school starts so incredibly early. And I tell myself, even if I get a sentence down, it's something. So one day I might get a sentence, one day I might get 4,000 words. But what I do is, Eugenia, you talk about outlining, and I know, different writers have different ways of doing it. There's an interesting about America's Screenwriters Guild on YouTube. You'll see Mike White, who did Nacho Libre, and then you have the I forget her name, but she wrote Devil Wears Prada, and they have 2 very different approaches to outlining. Mike White says, yeah, I'm outlining, I'm going for a walk, and the person who does Devil Wears Prada has this whole story map and everything. But what I normally do is I'll sit there before I end for the day. I'll just write a couple sentences or a sentence about where I want to go the next day. And so when I go back, I already know. Actually, I'm writing the sequel to Neighborhood Watch, appropriately called Neighborhood Watched. And for my writing kind of hit a dry well last couple of weeks, because I got to a part, I did not know what to do with a character. It was driving me nuts. I actually asked students for help. I was like, what would you do? What would you want to see? And it didn't come to me until I went for a walk with my son today, because I got away from it. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And it has to, like Eugenia was saying, like, you need continuity. It has to be logical, because if you don't believe it, the reader's not going to believe it.
Right. And you talked about, even if it's a sentence, because so many writers get caught up in how many words did I write that day instead of the time put in. If you put in an hour, some days it's going to be a day or two. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut said all he wanted at the end of any day is one good page. If he had that at the end of the year, even with holidays off, he has a book. So it sounds like you were more grounded in the time than the words.
Yeah, I'd rather have quality over quantity. Ted Powers over at Moraine said you can't fix crap in Photoshop. So I'd rather have one strong quality sentence than 5,000 sentences that I don't really care about. So,
Adam, what was your routine? You said that you dove into this during the pandemic, when there was not a whole lot else going on, but still, I know that can drive people crazy not having anything going on. So what was your routine there, Adam?
Yeah, I wrote whenever I could. And as others have said, there's really kind of two schools of thought when it comes to writing. There were pantsers who fly by the seat of their pants and just start writing whatever comes to them and see where their characters take them. And there are planners, and I am very much in the planner camp. And I think that was what was different with this go around. Instead of just trying to sit there and think of the story as it came, I had the whole thing mapped out, at least to a bare bones version, before I ever started. So when I finished my first draft, there were obvious things I went back through and this needs to be added and elaborated. If you read the book, there's the secondary kind of sidekick character of Sonia Torres was very kind of flat in the first draft, just in the background. And so going back to that was a chance to, as Eugenia had said, pivot to that plan that was in place and add more to it. But as for the writing itself, it was any chance I had to sit down in front of the computer and do it. My wife was very gracious. Our oldest was about a year and a half at the time that I was writing. And so after dinner, she would let me come into the office and lock myself in here until bath time. And so I got about an hour and a half a day of dedicated time to focus, and owe her a lot, owe her the world for giving me that opportunity and giving me that chance to do it. And she supported it the whole way. So it was just a little bit here and there. There'd be sitting on a work call that was a little not so interesting, and start just jotting notes on paper about this could happen next, and just had a wall of Post-it notes to come back to when I was ready. But I think just the consistency and continuity in it is the big thing. It's hard to make a habit. It's extremely easy to break one. So I think just making the time and dedicating to it is the most important thing that you can do.
So you have an hour and a half there. Kevin's trying to get signed before school. Eugenia's trying to balance all this. Sarah's trying to do it early in the morning. How do you get primed? Because, some people like myself, I need to read or do something for like the first 15 minutes or so to get going. And it sounds like Kevin has a sentence that he can play off of sometimes. How long does it take you to really get into the routine of writing something? If anybody wants to jump in.
For me, at least, it just varied on what was going on, where my mind was at, if it had been a hard day at work or if things had been pretty easy and calm, and just really dependent on the circumstances around things. But I always started, before I would write, I would read the last chapter that I had written, just to kind of remember where things were at. Or sometimes it was jumping around. My story is nonlinear and multiple points of view. So sometimes it would be checking in as to where was this particular character at the last time I wrote their stuff, and just kind of getting that and trying to be in the same space that they were in and think about what comes next or what's the next step to their story.
Very good. Anybody else want to build on that, or?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
jump in and say that's so similar. Sorry, Eugenia. The same thing as I would just go back through and, last couple paragraphs that I did the day before and kind of really try to be in not so much of a wasn't, I'd have spell check turned off. That would come later. I was really trying to get into more of a creative mode. And so that way, then by the time we hit the timer to start our sprint, I was ready to go off and running, and there'd be, some days it would just be like pulling teeth and you'd barely hit 250 words. But then other days I think my best 20-minute sprint was up in like the 850s. So it just kind of, you just start where you're at and build on it, because really it's the small steps, one bite of the apple, gets it done.
Right.
Yeah, I love that old quote from Finding Foresters. The first rule of writing is to write, not think. And sometimes I think when your head gets in the way, that's when you get stuck. And so the first draft is not what ends up. And then, like Adam, I'm impressed you went through 3. Luckily, I have a very strong editor that grounds me. And editing is a grueling, but also in a weird way, fun process. But yeah, that first draft, you have to remind yourself that this is just a draft, so whatever comes out, comes out. And sometimes it's that morning, whenever it is you write, that's your time, so like I go to bed at night and like I get to do my time in the morning, and even if it is nonsensical, I can always fix it later. So
Eugenia, it sounds like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I totally agree with what everyone said. I just kind of read what I read before, what I wrote before. It's almost like reading a book, you kind of earmark the page and you go back to it. That's how I kind of view writing, in the same way.
And I think several of you talked about the editing process. How did any of your experiences in journalism? Because obviously you write, we're writing on deadline, and talk about killing your babies, your words there on deadline. Sometimes an editor's been changing it a whole lot. So did that give you any sort of perspective on not being afraid to completely revamp or get rid of your sentences and words?
I will say this, if I can speak first.
Yes.
It's hard to edit your own work. I don't know about everyone else, even though I've edited. I remember the first draft I did, I edited it like twice, 3 times possibly. And when my editor saw it, she saw things that I did not see.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the strength of a newsroom, I guess, too.
I'll always remember coming into the den. I don't know if this still happens, but seeing the paper posted to that wall with a bunch of red marks on it and in a way not wanting to see like your story marked up. You all remember this, right? Am I crazy? You're not wanting to see your story marked up, but at the same time you wanting to see what you can fix. And my story was up there once or twice. Like all kinds of red marks, like okay, I'm gonna fix that later. But yeah, I mean, say in a certain way, editing fiction is similar to editing nonfiction, because there is a lot of research involved. Sometimes, as in Neighborhood Watch, I included a lot of journalism articles that had to do with it. And because I haven't actually written on a paper since 2012, I had to go back and work with some people I knew in the industry and say, is this an AP style? I can't even remember some of the AP style, even though I teach journalism. I'm teaching to freshmen through seniors. So certain components of AP style I'm a little rusty on, and certain things like that. And then there's this big macro and micro things like Eugenia was talking about continuity. Does this add up from page 2 to page 100? Little research things like that. There is a part where my book takes place, the narrative pacing takes place from 1986 to 2020. So I wanted to make that seem real. Who's on the cover of Time magazine, 1986 in the summer? Going back and researching that has to be right. So lots of little things like that. And then once you get all the macro developmental edits out of the way, all the micro edits, did I show and not tell? Was I clear? Are these sentences vague? All of that little thing that, and Eugenia's right, like there's only so much you can do to self-edit. I mean, you can take a break from it and come back, but I feel like you're still emotionally detached or emotionally attached. And so it takes a neutral eye and it humbles you. It's like, oh, I'm not the best writer in the world. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
So for me, when I finished my first draft, I was at about 68,000 words and had wanted to get to about 80 was my goal. And so I was like, okay, the second draft, I'll add those extra 12,000 words and we'll be good to go. And as I went through and edited that first draft, I added 13 scenes to the book and it came out at 63,000 words. So added 13 scenes and lost 5,000 words. So definitely had to be okay with the kill your babies mentality, and it strengthened things. And just fun story again. Credit to my wife for being my first editor and all of that helping. I had a scene where it was Sonia Torres, the sidekick character, and it said she threw a water bottle into the garbage can, and my wife scribbled a note next to it, and I had to go ask her what it meant. And she said, it says Sonia recycles. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, think about her character. She's a far left progressive 23-year-old. She's worried about saving the earth. She's not throwing a water bottle in a garbage can. She's recycling it. And so in a way, she had come to learn my characters as well as I knew them, or even better, and was able to help identify those character quirks where something seemed out of line for them. And then also to Kevin's point about accuracy and what was on the Time cover, each of my chapters has a date stamp on it for when it happens. And politics was kind of a central theme in the book, and Sonia's the young progressive, and Derek Price, the main character, is an older, more conservative type, and that leads to some fun banter between them. And the opening line of chapter 1 originally read, did you see what the idiot was tweeting this weekend in 2018? So you can infer who that's a reference to. And went back and checked, and that was the one rare weekend that he was not spouting off anything on Twitter. And so I just changed the line to, did you see what he's been tweeting? And so it's just that level of detail that I think that's the journalist mentality to, let's make sure this is accurate. It's if your mother says she loves you, check it out. So wanting to make sure even the littlest facts of things lined up.
So when you're writing the book there, all of you, Adam, you were just talking about adding 13 scenes and going from 68 to 63 and, making multiple versions of it. How do you know when the book's ending? I mean, if you're outlining it, I know you have a sense of that because you've outlined it, but there's also some people who just build on the day before and they're doing that. But either way, how do you know what should be the last word, the last sentence in that last scene, even if you think you know what the scene is? Sarah, why don't you go ahead and start with that one?
That's a really good question that I haven't figured out the answer to yet, because that scene that I originally inspired me to write the book is still I keep discovering more things and writing more content. And what happens is that scene is not actually in a book yet. So I've built this entire world around, I've built an entire new world with multiple dimensions, and I keep finding more stories to write about. And so I think the best thing I can say is that you have to come to when there's you kind of, with epic fantasy, which is my genre, you have an overarching story that continues across the series. that gives kind of a structure and ties all of your books together. But then you also have a smaller, act 1, 2, and 3 structure in there. And what I tried to do with book 1 is have that closure with the character's growth. And so at the end, she kind of came to a point where she had kind of reached a realization. But at the same time, it's still a cliffhanger, and I don't know when it's going to end. But I'm also having fun writing it. So it's and I think that's part of it too. When it's not fun anymore to write, it's probably time to end it.
Somebody else want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'd echo what Sarah said there. It's almost like method acting, and it's weird. You get in the head of a character, and you have to think like that character, for better or worse. And for me, as a thriller horror writer, people are like, "Are you okay?" But what she's talking about too, 1 act, 2 act. People think of a plot diagram as your basic, exposition, rising, action. But when I took a screenwriting course, it's very interesting because they talk about an opening image as a beat sheet. Your opening image should line up with your ending image. So if you think about how a movie opens, like Forrest Gump, you start with the feather, right? And it ends with the feather. Pulp Fiction, actually, it's non-linear. So we start with the restaurant scene, it ends with the restaurant scene, right? So what is the commentary about how this work of art is starting, how the work of art is ending? Frankenstein, the classic novel, is the frame story of the hero's quest. So you have to think about how this opening, is going to come full circle. So it's almost as, does this make sense where my saga, my story, my quest, whatever, is beginning, and how am I going to match this beginning with an ending? So it's almost like if you're unit planning as a teacher, start with the end in mind.
Anybody else want to build on that?
Yeah, just as Kevin said about beat sheets, one of the most helpful books that I read was called Save the Cat. And it's a screenwriting book, and then they made a novel version of it. But it lays out different beat sheets for like 13 different story types that exist. And they're not just the hero's journey. It's there are some that are kind of romance driven and whatnot, all across genres. And it was extremely helpful to kind of plan out the progression of things and where things end. And for me, in my case, the main character in the book, Derek Price, is a former journalist and all of that. And so that was a big theme in the book. And so early on, I latched onto the phrase bringing the light out of darkness, or finding the truth in the darkness, things like that. And so I kind of knew how I wanted things to end and what the last line of the book would end up being. And so it was probably written somewhere in notes well before I ever got to that point in the story. But one of the hardest things, I think, as a writer, and I'm sure others will probably agree, is that at a certain point, you just have to declare the story's done. As Sarah said, otherwise you keep just working on things. And that's, as I said, I had 3 main kind of drafts and revisions, about 8 rounds of editing across different formats. And at a certain point, it was like, I could sit here and keep making changes and nitpick words here or there, but you've just got to put the line in the sand and say, I'm done touching this. It's going up for publishing or submission if you're trying to go the traditional route. But it's just kind of coming, the acceptance of coming to terms with, yes, this journey's over. And in my case, a lot of people have asked, have you ever thought about writing a sequel? And I don't think there's a sequel there. For me, the characters in my book, they had their closure. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of their story. And so that's just the kind of thing you have to think about and wrestle with as a writer.
So you've written the book, you know where it's ending, you think you're done. Maybe you've gone through the editing process and it finally gets through that and it gets published. So what was the reaction? What was the feelings when you see the book in print and you have it in your hands and then you're like, how do I get it out there? So Some people self-publish, some people have publishing houses. What was the reactions? What were some of the things you expected to hear back and that were joyous? And what were some of the things that you were surprised by?
Just to chime in real quick, when you talk about self-publishing, there are some connotations with that, and it used to be a dirty word. I remember when I was
no, not
working.
at all.
I was working at the newspaper back 2007 to 2014. We'd get people that said, "Oh, I published a book," and if it was self-published, we wouldn't touch it or do anything with it. And it was a vanity thing that anybody with money could self-publish. And it's still very much that case. Anybody can take a Word document and upload it to Amazon. But I found a Facebook group called 20 Books to 50K, which is a marketing group for independent authors. And the people that contribute to that community have completely changed perceptions on self-publishing and what's possible as a career and all of that. So kind of one of those things in the beginning, it was a little worry of, is this what I want to do? In my case, it was more so just about saying, hey, I lived this dream than ever trying to make money off it. So that's what I'd planned to do, but I had very positive reception. I grew up in a town of 750 people in Northern Illinois, and I think about 300 of the people there ordered the book. So
what town was that, Adam? I forget.
South Wilmington, Illinois.
Where's that near?
It's about half an hour south of Joliet.
Okay.
If you know Joliet. An hour south of Chicago, basically. Sure. So it was really cool, and there was a lot of hometown pride and people that I hadn't talked to in years reaching out and saying, this is so cool, can't wait to read this. And so it was a good feeling just being able to say I did it and that I lived a dream.
Yeah, because you're right. Self-publishing used to, be one of those things where people would think it was not worth it. You could just do it yourself. But now top selling authors are now doing that. As a matter of fact, you can make a lot more money that way, instead of getting $2 a book, like some people get, you can get, sometimes 3/4 of it or 90% of it if you're self-published, right? So what have been some of the other reactions, from the book that you were maybe surprised, not surprised? I know I see a lot, I've been seeing, I know your reactions on Facebook through the years, all this, and been excited for all of you, but what was kind of surprising for you or just so heartfelt?
I know for me, I was a bit scared to release it. It just, your name is attached to it and, it's out there. And of course, I told family and friends first. I made a whole video releasing it, and I was proud of finally, writing a book was a childhood dream for me. So that was a big deal. I will say that I do have an Instagram page where I, push it out, and sometimes I do paid advertisement. One in particular, there was this woman in England that, she was a blogger, and she did a whole, this book is so relatable. And I'm like, oh my God, this is I don't know this person. And I think especially when strangers say I love your story and it's so relatable and I resonated with this character, I was Jayla or something, and it's oh wow, this is, I wrote it more for me as a more therapeutic thing, even though I thought it could relate to people, but I didn't, when it actually does, it's just it's incredible.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, it was times like this, I kind of wish I took a few PR classes at EIU or took some marketing classes at EIU. And it's been so a rough ride learning the marketing end of it. And I give so much credit to people that are in that. But it's been a wild ride, learning all that, just like everybody else. I didn't know what to expect. Thankfully, the book really took off. A lot of positive reviews, a lot of good reception. I can say the book is in 3 bookstores. It's in 2 local ones and actually one that's in the UK now. So it's fulfilled beyond what I ever thought it'd be. And I have a couple book signings coming up, and it kind of like what Eugenia's saying, like when you can have strangers read it, connect with it, it's like, well, this is great. You get the word out. People are affected by what you write, and we're not. I don't think anybody else is. We're not rich off of it, but when you're rich off people liking what you do, that makes all the difference. So,
Anybody else? If not, one of the things I'm wondering about is you talked about the good reviews. Inevitably someone's going to get a bad review or two, and it's never fun to look at, right? So, how do you deal with those? I mean, has anything in your journalism experience helped you out that? Because we certainly get a lot of negative reactions there, right?
I have a good story about my first 1-star review.
Sure.
So what happened is a lady bought it and only got, I think she even said in the review, a certain percentage through, and then decided that she said, how is this for kids? This can't be for kids. And gave me a 1-star review. And, I just kind of had to chuckle because that was my first 1-star review, my first not 5-star review. Actually, it seems like the reception that it has had, and I've been kind of a little low key with the way I'm promoting it. I'm kind of following a specific strategy that in the group that Adam mentioned, 20 books to 50K. I'm in there as well, and am very grateful to all that I've learned there. And and really what happened is she came in through one of my Amazon ads, and she thought she was reading a middle grade story, and it's really a YA, upper YA story. And at that point there's nothing really you can do about that. And I would say the journalism training definitely helped kind of give me a thick skin. I mean, my first job after college, I had a very brilliant editor, was very lucky here in the St. Louis area, but I will tell you what, there were nights that he made me cry with his editing. It was tough, and you learned really quick how to take critical feedback and turn it into something that's hopeful. And so that gave me the skills that when I did get that 1-star review, I mean, I've had very close author friends who would get those 1-star reviews and then they couldn't write again. It just killed them. And for me, I was able to just kind of take it with a grain of salt. I dug into it. That again, the journalism, I've got to figure out what happened here. And what ended up happening is that review actually drives the most sales because everybody wants to know what that scene is. So she referenced a specific scene where my main character gets attacked by an eel, which is one of my magical creatures. And so everybody wants to know about the eel now. And so they see that 1-star review, and I had the highest page count read the next weekend. So it posted on a Friday, and that Saturday and Sunday, the page reads were just through the roof, and I couldn't even believe it. And so that just goes to show you that in this business, so you're not gonna, if you're not making people mad, then you're probably not doing something right, because what some people like, other people are gonna hate.
Yeah, that's so true. And sometimes you just have to laugh at it. Like you said, like people will give you bad reviews because it wasn't their type of book, or like, that's so funny. It's like, oh, it was a children, like, did you read the synopsis? Did you read the type of, and here's somebody that's supposed to be a reader, or you'll see like the comments they leave, like, did a 2nd grader write this? So those are the types that you laugh off. And then there's certain types like, okay, maybe I could work on that in my writing, and those are helpful. And that's where the thick skin, it's like, and if you see a trend of 3-star, and if you see a trend, it's like, okay, maybe it is drawn out to a certain point, maybe, so there are good feedback, and there's one where it's like, okay, I'm just gonna laugh this off. It is what it is. So
Well, first, I just have to say, I once read a book called Monster Truck, and I should have given it a 1-star review because nobody ever found Bigfoot before the end of the book. So that's what I was there for. But
Adam, you joke about that, but I can't tell you how many people have told me that. How come you didn't find Bigfoot? And I said, well, maybe it should have been a fantasy book like Sarah's or something like that, and they didn't get the point. I had someone get angry because I cursed in it, but yeah.
But for me, I've
What?
got a bit of a different take on the negative kind of review thing. For me, I was writing a book set in the industry that I was working in at the time with HOA management. And so I had people that were leaders in my company that were warning me before they'd seen a word of the book and cautioning and are you sure this isn't a career limiting move? Like, is this going to affect your ability to move up in the industry? And in a way, that's a red flag that maybe this isn't the right industry to be in. And thankfully, I'm not in it anymore. But I wound up going to our VP of HR, who was one of my good friends. And I asked her to be one of my beta readers because I was like, can you read this and tell me if I'm going to get fired if I hit publish on this? So I had to deal with a little bit of that unknown negativity even before the book had ever been put out for anybody to read. So just a little bit of different take and experience in that regard.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had a weird, I remember, I think 3 months into my book release, I had a 1 out of 5 star. I had a 5 out of 5 and then a 1 out of 5 that they just said a great book for millennials. And I'm like, is that did you mean 5 or did you mean 1? I don't know. Maybe they weren't a millennial. I don't know. But, and then there were some that was, I think there was one woman or person, I don't know who it was, that said that what they would have done with my book. And I'm like, oh, that's great. You know, I just take it with like, it's almost like anytime you put anything out there, any type of creative being, I mean, we see it all the time on social media. There are some people that will like you and some people that don't. It's the same thing with writing. There are some people that like, this book resonates with me, and some people are like, this book is boring. I can't please all of you.
No, nor should you.
Right.
Nor
Same
should
thing
you.
with journalism. There are some people that they get angry with an article, and some people are great, with this. So, yeah.
Right. Maybe that's the key here. You have to be a journalist first to be able to handle all this stuff. I guess last thing I have really is what's something that we haven't talked about about your book or the process, maybe that you'd want to get out there. Anything?
Oh, I want to jump in on this.
You go for it.
All right. So I just want to say that everything at the Den, everything that I learned there really dovetailed, I don't think any more perfect, into being an indie author. So when you think about, the editing process, you think about the editors that we all worked with while we were at the paper, and or being editors as well, right? And then the writing part as a reporter, but then also being an indie author, you've got to understand how cover designs work and how your marketing work, and and the visual aspect of it. So how are you gonna, like you guys see my logo there, right? Well, all those skills came from being able to use Photoshop thanks to Brian Poulter's visual arts class, and InDesign during late nights and in copy, and I think that, and also to loop back to the question earlier about the ending, Kevin mentioned kind of like the circle screenwriting, ending on the same image that you start with. Well, I learned that in Sally's feature writing class. So she talks about circle endings and bringing it back to where you started, and that's kind of how you get that sense of closure. And I feel like that, when we were all graduating in 2007, right? So the Kindle itself wasn't as big of a thing. We didn't have Kindles, right? So that happened in 2010, 2011. And so I'm sitting in my day job and my marketing job, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm writing and I know how to, I'm pitching traditional agents and publishers, and I'm being told that, I'm running into gatekeepers, which I'm also familiar with, because your editor is picking what's getting coverage. We went in and talked about that in ethics, where you're deciding like what is your news value and your judgment that you're picking, what your stories are that you're covering. Well, it kind of covers what type of, like, your story idea. Like, how do you know what is a good story that you're going to cover? Well, does it have all 7 of those news elements in it that we learned? That's what I use sometimes. So I teach that to my marketing interns still. So I think that can't be said enough, is that as far as the journalism goes and how it prepared me for becoming an indie author, it was really a perfect fit. When I sat down and realized, you know what, this new digital publishing era gives me control out of everything. And I learned all these skills, from 5 to midnight, putting out a paper on a daily basis. Like, heck yeah, I'm going to do this myself.
Somebody
I'm
else?
also a control freak.
I think the biggest thing that I would add is just to expect the unexpected. You never know. I've talked about being a planner and plotting everything out, but there were still times and things that would come up that I'd write. I'd go back and read things, and there'd either be a "wow, I wrote that," or a "God, I wrote that" reaction. That it goes both ways. That things are going to be good, things are going to be bad, but you always have the chance to change that. And the character of mine that wound up becoming my favorite one to write is the character that's dead at the start of the book. And her story is only told through the flashback scenes. It's the main character's wife, but I didn't expect her to even play that big of a role in the story. It was kind of, again, more thought to be this is kind of background as to what has led to this, but she wound up, in my opinion, becoming one of the most vibrant characters in the book. Very full of character and cynicism, sarcasm, definitely memorable. And there were scenes that I wrote that are tragic scenes that it took me a while to write it, because I was sitting here trying to write through the tears of the emotion of what's going on. And so it's a journey from beginning to end. And just even having one book under my belt, it was a life-changing experience to do it. Newfound appreciation for all different types of people through the process and whatnot. And I have a second book that I've started last year, and it sat there untouched for several months as life got in the way, but hoping to one day get back to it and see kind of where that next journey leads. And it all has journalism ties to it that started in those days at Eastern. As I said, Derek Price in To Live and Die at Shadow Ridge was a former journalist. And the next story that I'm working on that I have started is called Deadline. And it's the story of a young wannabe reporter that has to come home to her small town because her father falls ill, and the only job that she can get is working as an obituary clerk at a newspaper. And she starts being taunted by a serial killer who's sending in obituaries for people before they're dead. And so journalism definitely plays a role in everything that I have. And that all started with EIU. Even if there was a certain professor that gave me a C in news writing, I don't hold grudges.
Who the hell would do that?
Yeah, I think that, being a journalist, well, I want to make 2 points. First, going back to even, I think somebody touched on the research part. That is extremely important. I made sure, like, I've never been to New York, and one of my characters is in New York, making sure that I am, not offending New Yorkers by having something that's completely made up, that a completely made up street or anything. So I think, like, having those skills as journalism taught me, like, research, make sure it's, true. Also, like the one thing I really loved about my time at EIU was I did a lot of feature writing. I wrote for Pounce at one point. I don't know if it's still around. And but it was a feature kind of like magazine type style a newspaper. And I loved, like, there was one particular story I remember writing about this one beauty queen that passed away, unfortunately. And I remember her sister was like super connected to that. Like I wrote the line of like in a way that it was almost like you were viewing her winning a crown. She was a beauty queen. So just seeing like developing scenes like that and writing scenes like that kind of almost prepared me to write fiction, because you have to paint the scene for the reader and you have to almost put them in this place, because it's not like a movie where you can visually see it. They can't see it, so you have to describe it. You have to make them feel the emotions of whatever you want, whatever effect you want the reader to have. And I think like that was for me first developed within like feature writing and different type of stories I would write. And so it was really beneficial for me. And I really, and also one more thing, when it comes to PR, you know what journalists are looking for. So if you write like a PR, trying to pitch something to like a book editor, like, are they going to reject this or not? Yes, no, or even a blogger. So, yeah.
Very good. Kevin?
I should say it's kind of funny. There's actually a proposal scene I inserted. It's like well, it's not an Easter egg, but I guess, but where they propose in front of Old Main. But anyway, yeah, I mean, writing a book is a lesson in endurance. And I tell my students that, it's cliche, but if you want something bad enough, it can happen. But it's a pain in the butt. It's a good pain in the butt, but it is. And it took me 3 years, year and a half to write, a year to edit, and another half a year to send out query letters and whatnot, try my hand at traditional publishing. But I think at EIU, all that time covering Daniel's hockey team really prepped me for that, because there are a lot of late nights, going to, Kentucky and Missouri and all that with the team. So I would get there, games would start at midnight. And I would get home on a Sunday night, class would start at Monday. I would walk into, class, I'd get like 4 hours sleep. The Den would expect the article that day, and I would go and do it all over again. And it wasn't a second thought. I'd drink like 5 Mountain Dews a day. I'd have my oatmeal cream pie for lunch. It was how it was, and then, Daniels would look over, he'd say, well, you got to change this. I'm like, come on, Daniels, but, so it really kind of prepped you for working with somebody else. Like writing, people think of it as this isolated process, and it's not. To be able to work with an editor who strengthens you and humbles you. There are times when I would go through this, long novel process, and I just wanted the book to be done already. There was a time when my editor was like, you rewrite the ending. I'm like, really? The entire ending? But I'm glad I did. It's a much stronger ending. And when the thing was done, I put out a product I could be proud of. And it's grueling. There's, like people said, you get up early in the morning and then you have to work and stuff. But being at the Den prepared you for that, because you went through the ringer and you already did that stuff. So.
Well, thanks so much for coming, everybody. We're all I'm very proud and of what you've done, and excited to see what you're going to be doing in the future, and look forward to reading whatever else that you're doing. And I also hope that we'll see you here in person one of these days too. I'd love to sit down and talk to you.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Beth. Thanks everybody else for setting this up. Thanks, Lola. It's been great seeing everybody here.
Thanks, everybody. It's really great to hear from you all.
Yeah, and it'd be good to see everybody in person again one day, but time constraints and whatever. So,
Yeah.
all right, looking forward to everybody else and what they have to write, and hopefully hear from you guys soon. Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank
Thank
Thank you guys so much.
so
All right.
much.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.